Hello and welcome to Chalk Talk, your source for Buckeye Athletics news, updates, and analysis. I'm Andrew Todd Smith alongside
Aaron Yerian.
Mr. Aaron Yerian, back on camera with us this week. But let's dive right into it, Aaron. We've had a full week of, as I said, Buckeye Athletics action. What's been going on?
Well, men's basketball this week. Let's tip it off right there. They had a big matchup against Iowa, and then earlier this week they were away in Evanston, Illinois. D'Angelo Russell, career high 33 points in the 69-67 thriller last.
Yeah, you nailed it on the head. D'Angelo Russell is the story of this team right now. In that game against Iowa, which they did lose by a decision of 76-67, he notched his first career double-double, so an impressive performance by the freshman. They changed up their defensive scheme in both of these games. It's interesting to see this team kind of adjust to conference play a little bit. They're playing more of a flexible man scheme as opposed to this typical 2-3 zone. But again, they've been struggling, so they rely heavily on Russell, of course, as you mentioned. Career high 33 points, that speaks for itself. They did rely heavily, however, on sophomore forward Mark Loving in terms of playing time, and then Jayshawn Tate had a great game against Iowa, but again, they did drop that game to the Hawkeyes, their second loss to the Hawkeyes this season, so the series sweep belongs to Fran McCaffrey and his team. Shannon Scott struggled in that game against Iowa. He shot only 3 of 9, 9 points, 4 rebounds, and 1 assist. Pretty uncharacteristic for him because we talked about it last time. He leads in assists on the team. But forward Aaron White and center Adam Woodbury for the Hawkeyes, frankly, when those guys are shooting above 50%, above 60%, it was no contest for the Buckeyes. So going to that Northwestern loss, there were 2 crucial no calls of goaltending that likely could have tipped the scales in the Wildcats' favor. So important to note that there. But center/forward, we've talked about him before, the big man Anthony Lee. He had a mismatch against forward Vic Law, and frankly, Law made him look silly once or twice with fadeaway jumpers. No excuse for it, 2-inch advantage. Northwestern had every chance to get back in that game, but they squandered some late chances. Ohio State struggled a little bit from the free throw line, so they were in it to win it right until the end. They had a banking 3-point shot, but again, the Wildcats came up short. So they will be hosting Indiana this weekend. Indiana now coming off a key upset of number 13 Maryland last night. So we'll be interested to see how that plays out in the Schottenstein Arena. But the women's basketball have also been busy lately, Aaron, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, Kelsey Mitchell, she came up with the Big Ten Freshman of the Week this week. She had 21 points against the Nittany Lions of Penn State in front of the largest crowd at Value City Arena.
Yeah, Kelsey Mitchell, the star of this team, leading in scoring. She's an 80% free throw shooter. She had 9 3-pointers, a school record last week in that loss to then number 23 Minnesota. Come back to Minnesota in a moment. So they lost 76-72. Minnesota, great rebounding team. So despite her Herculean effort, the Buckeyes came up short. But as you said, Aaron, they beat Penn State 69-60, good conference win. Junior guard Amherst Alston, that's the other name that I wanted to mention. Another outstanding free throw shooter. She had 18 points in that game. She had a better shooting percentage, it's worth noting, than Kelsey Mitchell's, going to 7 of 15 as opposed to 7 of 20. So Mitchell got that score line going in her favor, but she's taking more shots. So keep an eye on Alston. But they do play Purdue Sunday, and the reason that's interesting, we talked about an upset last night in the men's world. Well, Purdue just beat the Minnesota team that beat the Buckeyes last week in overtime last night. So it's anybody's guess as to how that matchup's going to play out Sunday.
Moving along now to men's tennis. The men going pink to raise money for the Spielman Foundation. The number 5 Buckeyes, they hosted Butler and Xavier this week. Chris Diaz, Hunter Callahan, and Kevin Mecca, they're all doing work to extend the winning streak. Diaz improves to 12-3, while the Buckeyes roll on past the Bulldogs and the Musketeers. They'll start the season 4-0. This weekend, they'll face Auburn in the ITA kickoff. And then on Sunday, they'll play either the winner of Tulsa and Purdue. So,
nice
little tournament coming up here in Columbus before they go on to continue the rest of their season.
Yeah, of course, that indoor title they're looking to defend as of last year. So the men very strong during the winter months. But moving on, we were witness to some men's volleyball action. Last Friday, they'll be playing again tonight, Friday night, at St. John Arena. 3-1 win over Limestone, Aaron. They looked great. They're improving on the season. They rebounded from that struggle on the road trip that Kaylee and I had mentioned to Hawaii.
15 service aces this time around. I mean, it's the different. You look at the women's team from the last semester, and it's the different kind of issue. I mean, they're ranked 4th nationally when it comes to service line points.
Yeah, they had a great game against Limestone. Freshman opposite. That's the story there. Nicholas Surgeon, 16 kills, 4 service aces. He did have 5 service errors, but he made up for it. 26 receptions, 20 points, led the team. So that's the guy to keep an eye on as they move forward. They will be facing George Mason tonight, as I said, at St. John Arena. But a couple more experienced players to keep an eye on. Redshirt junior outside hitter Matt Pullman had 4 service errors, but again, I'm a negative then positive kind of guy.
Right.
4 block assists. So he's a force up there by the net. Redshirt senior middle blocker. We talked about middle blockers extensively during the women's season with Taylor Sandbothy. Sean Heron, he had 10 kills to Sershin's 16. So, and then also keep an eye on senior outside hitter Michael Henchy. I expect him to have a big game against George Mason. And they've with the exception of the one loss, that all their matches have gone to 3-1 decisions. So don't panic, Buckeye fans, if they drop an early set, say in the second or third. They tend to rebound and have a strong performance. But we're going to finish on the note of ice hockey.
Ooh.
Ohio State hosted their arch rival in the men's department. Michigan, of course, visiting Value City Arena. And it was a high-scoring affair, Aaron. 10-6. Michigan got the better of Ohio State, but Anthony Greco had a hat trick, so congratulations to him. And Matt Johnson also had 2 goals. But while the men were getting a lot of the spotlight over there in the bigger venue, the women were taking on visiting North Dakota. Now, they dropped both of those games Friday and Saturday evening, 1-0 both times. But I was there for the Saturday matchup, and let me tell you, they outshot North Dakota 31-26. The intensity, the ferocity is there. They're having a great season as far as WCHA hockey goes, but they couldn't get the better of North Dakota in those 2 matchups. Of course, Stacey Danzak having a strong performance, obviously, to only hold them to 1 goal. But we talked to Coach Nate Handrahan after the game Saturday, and he had some feedback as to what his team takes away from a tough series like this.
Gap control is always a focus of ours from a defensive standpoint. For our defensemen, how are we closing gap and limiting their opportunities, shutting players down as they're receiving pucks as opposed to allowing good players to catch passes and then start to wind it up and make plays. And then speed is certainly an element. That's something that McKinnon brings to the table. When she's disrupting, it's because she's speed and all over the ice, and that's something that's a factor that you can't contain. I think that they played pretty solid, but our opportunities were there for us. That we put the puck home the way we need to. The games possibly change a little bit. I think we have a group that wants more, and to go in the locker room and try and find the silver lining, I think is a little bit. Yes, we want to pull away some positive things, but at the same time, the fuel of not getting points in January, and we're in a pretty solid spot in league standings. That's got to burn. That's got to sting, and that's got to fuel us in what we do going forward. We can paint a rosy picture that everything's going to be okay, but I don't know if it's doing our team a great service to say, hey, yeah, good old college try. We came away with nothing this weekend, and that's unacceptable on home ice, and we got to make sure that we take care of business.
Coach Nate Handrahan, of course, of the women's ice hockey team, having some emotional words about the mindset of this team moving forward. As he said, the sting of a lost series like this after they had come into that series on a 6-game winning streak. So good to see him focusing not necessarily on, feel-good takeaways. He knows that this team is capable of better, and he's holding them to a higher standard. So it's good to see his input there. But I think that's going to do it for us this week. Of course, we're going to be changing things up a little bit with an early show next week. So we'll be able to recap some of the football championship celebration action, as well as the men's volleyball match that we mentioned against George Mason, tennis, all kinds of things going on this weekend. So follow us at Chalk Talk OSU on Twitter. Hashtag CTOSU, as always, chime into the conversation. But like I said, that's going to do it for us this week. For Aaron Yarian, I'm Andrew Todd Smith. Have a good weekend.